Welcome to Dreamy Old Stories. Here we tell slow and gentle tales from history. Stories that calm your mind and help you fall asleep. If you enjoy the journey, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin tonight's dreamy story. As the story continues, the pace remains slow and unhurried. There is no rush here, only the quiet passing of time. We move forward gently, staying within the quiet of the same night. We remained close to the body. We noticed discomfort, interruption, and the patient return of sleep. Now we drift outward again, not far, just enough to notice how rarely medieval people slept alone. Sleep, for most, was a shared experience. It happened among others, shaped by closeness, familiarity, and quiet cooperation. In the Middle Ages, solitude at night was uncommon. Most households slept together in one main room. Walls were few, space was limited, privacy was not expected. Parents, children, and sometimes extended family members shared the same sleeping area. Beds stood close together, or one large bed held several bodies. This closeness was practical. Shared sleep conserved warmth. Bodies generated heat. Blankets overlapped. Cold air was kept away by closeness rather than insulation. In winter, this mattered greatly. Shared sleep also offered reassurance. In the dark, presence mattered. Breathing nearby confirmed safety. Small movements reminded sleepers they were not alone. This reduced fear without words. Children learned this early. A child falling asleep among adults absorbed calm. Night sounds felt less threatening when others rested nearby. Fear, when it appeared, was eased by touch or voice rather than explanation. Sleep became associated with togetherness, even among adults. Shared sleep was normal and unremarkable. Spouses slept together, often with children beside them. Older children might share beds with siblings. Servants sometimes slept in the same room as employers, on pallets or benches nearby. No one questioned this arrangement. It was practical, familiar, and expected. Shared sleeping required cooperation. People learned to move quietly. Turning slowly mattered. Getting up carefully prevented disturbance. Blankets were shared respectfully. Everyone adjusted. Sleep became a collective skill. Snoring existed, of course. So did coughing, murmuring, and shifting. These sounds were tolerated. They blended into the background of the night. People learned which sounds mattered and which did not. A familiar cough did not wake the room. An unfamiliar sound at dot boundaries existed even within closeness. Personal space was small but understood. Touch was expected but not intrusive. People learned how to share warmth without crowding excessively. This balance was learned through repetition rather than instruction. In wealthier homes, shared sleep still existed, but with variation. Nobles slept in larger rooms, sometimes with curtained beds. These curtains created a sense of separation without isolation. Servants slept nearby, often within sight or sound. Privacy increased slightly, but solitude remained rare. Curtains muffled drafts and sound more than they created emotional distance. The noble was never truly alone at night. In inns, shared sleep took on another form. Travelers slept beside strangers. Beds were shared by necessity. This arrangement was accepted, though not always comfortable. People slept lightly, aware of unfamiliar bodies and sounds. Trust was cautious but functional. Valuables were kept close. Shoes might remain nearby. Sleep happened anyway. This ability to sleep among strangers speaks to a different relationship with rest. Comfort was secondary to necessity. The body adapted. Monasteries offered another version of shared sleep. Monks and nuns slept in communal dormitories. Beds were aligned. Movement was visible. Silence was expected. Night routines were synchronized. Shared. Sleep reinforced discipline and equality. Everyone rested under the same conditions. In these spaces, individuality softened. Sleep belonged to the group. Shared sleeping also shaped waking. When one person rose, others stirred slightly. Sounds carried. Morning arrived collectively. The day began together. This reduced the shock of waking. No one woke alone to an empty room. The presence of others eased the transition from sleep to work. Illness tested shared sleep. When someone fell sick, others adjusted. Positions changed. Extra space was made, if possible. Sleep became lighter for everyone nearby. Care happened naturally. Without instruction, shared sleep encouraged awareness. People noticed breathing patterns, restlessness, warmth, and stillness. Changes were felt quickly. This closeness acted as a form of quiet monitoring. Danger was detected early. A fever, a struggle to breathe, an unusual stillness. These signs were noticed not by instruments, but by bodies close together. This made shared sleep protective. Of course, shared sleep also limited privacy. Private thoughts stayed internal. Dreams were not always spoken of. Moments of solitude were rare. Yet medieval people did not mourn this loss. Privacy was not central to identity. Belonging mattered more. Sleep reinforced belonging. To sleep among others was to be part of a household, a group, a place. Being invited to sleep within a space meant acceptance and trust. Exclusion from shared. Sleep carried meaning. A servant sent to sleep elsewhere. A traveler refused lodging. A person isolated due to illness or conflict. These moments were noticed, shared. Sleep marked inclusion. As we remain here, in this crowded but calm sleeping space, we can feel how closeness shaped medieval rest. Sleep was not about retreating inward alone. It was about settling among others, adjusting gently and trusting. The shared rhythm of the night. We stayed with families and households, where closeness shaped rest and familiarity softened fear. Now we drift a little farther outward, into situations where shared sleep involved strangers, guests, and people who did not know one another well. Hospitality, travel, and obligation created sleeping arrangements that were practical, quiet, and governed by unspoken rules. In the Middle Ages, travel was slow and tiring. Journeys took days or weeks. Roads were rough. Weather was unpredictable. When night came, rest was needed wherever it could be found. Inns, monasteries, private homes, and barns all served as sleeping places. Privacy was rare. Inns offered beds, but these were often shared. A single bed might hold 2, 3, or more travelers. This was not considered strange. It was expected. Beds were resources, not personal spaces. Travelers accepted this arrangement. Calmly, they slept lightly at first, aware of unfamiliar breathing, shifting bodies, and muted sounds. Over time, exhaustion softened alertness. Sleep arrived despite discomfort. Trust was cautious, not fearful. Valuables were kept close. Belts or pouches might remain worn. Shoes were placed within reach. Hands rested where they could feel what mattered. Sleep happened anyway. The ability to rest among strangers was learned early. People grew up sharing beds with family. Sleeping beside someone unknown was not a great leap. The body recognized the pattern. Warmth, presence, and stillness signaled safety enough. Conversation before sleep was brief. Names might be exchanged. Origins mentioned. Then quiet returned. Darkness leveled difference. Everyone was equally tired. Monasteries offered a different form of hospitality. Travelers were often welcomed and given a place to sleep. These spaces were orderly and calm. Dormitories were shared, but silence was encouraged. Sleep followed routine. Guests adjusted quickly. The rules were clear. Rest was permitted, but not indulgent. Waking for prayers was expected. Sleep bent itself around devotion. This predictability made rest easier. Sleeping in another household carried its own etiquette. Guests were offered space near the hearth or in a common room. Hosts adjusted their own arrangements to make room. Shared sleep reinforced bonds of hospitality and obligation. To offer sleep was to offer safety. Refusing someone rests was serious. It suggested mistrust or hostility. Sleep was tied to social acceptance. Sleeping among strangers also required restraint. Movement was limited. Noise was avoided. People learned to occupy little space. These habits reduced tension and allowed rest to continue. Awkwardness existed, but it was quiet. There was no expectation of comfort beyond basic shelter. Sleep was functional. Fear of theft or harm existed, but it did not dominate. Most people were poor. Stealing from a sleeping companion offered little reward and high risk. Reputation mattered. Communities were small. Violence was rare inside shared sleeping spaces. Sleep relied on social pressure as much as locks. Night watch existed in towns and inns. Someone remained awake. A watchman, an innkeeper, a guard. Their presence allowed others to sleep more deeply. This division of rest was accepted. Those who slept trusted those who watched. Those who watched understood their role. In crowded sleeping spaces, sounds multiplied. Snoring, coughing, shifting, murmured dreams. These sounds overlapped until they became background. The body learned to filter them. Silence was not expected. Complete. Silence might even feel unsettling. Smell was another constant. Travelers carried the scent of road, sweat, animals, and weather. Inns smelled of food, smoke, and damp wood. These smells mixed and settled into the night. They were noticed briefly, then ignored. Sleep adapted. Illness complicated, shared sleep. A coughing traveler might be positioned near a wall or window. Others adjusted space was made if possible. Concern existed. But isolation was rare unless illness was severe. Care happened through proximity, a hand checking a forehead, a blanket shared, quiet observation. Shared sleep created responsibility. If someone failed to wake, others noticed. If breathing changed, it was felt. This closeness acted as a quiet safety net. Strangers became temporary communities at night. By morning, these groups dissolved. People rose. They gathered belongings. Brief words were exchanged. Then paths separated. The shared night ended without ceremony. Sleep had served its purpose. Perhaps the most striking feature of these arrangements is how unremarkable they were. Shared sleep among strangers did not require explanation. It was practical. It worked. Comfort was not the goal. Continuation was. As we remain here, listening to many breaths in the dark, we can feel how medieval sleep relied on adaptation rather than control. The body learned to rest wherever it could, among whoever was present. We move forward gently, letting the night loosen its grip without breaking it. We stayed with shared sleep among families and strangers. We felt how closeness and habit allowed rest to happen almost anywhere. Now we drift toward the edge of night. Itself, not yet morning, but the slow transition that comes before it. The hours when sleep lightens, when the body begins to prepare for waking, even before the eyes open. In the Middle Ages, waking was not sudden. There were no alarms to cut through sleep, no sharp sounds demanding attention. Morning arrived gradually, and the body followed. Sleep thinned as the night moved on. During the second sleep, rest was often deeper at first, then lighter toward dawn. Dreams faded. Awareness returned slowly. People shifted more. Breathing changed. The body sensed the coming day long before it was visible. This transition was familiar. People did not fight it. They allowed themselves to drift upward from sleep. Light played the first role. Before the sun appeared, the sky softened. Darkness became less complete. Shapes returned faintly. The difference was subtle, but the body noticed. Birds often announce morning before light did. Their sounds were the earliest. Signal of change. One bird calling, then another. Slowly, the world spoke again. These sounds did not shock sleepers awake. They eased them toward waking. Animals joined in. Cows shifted. Horses stamped. Chickens stirred. Dogs lifted their heads. These familiar movements told the household that night was ending. People woke. In response, not command, someone opened their eyes. Someone stretched slightly. Someone sat up and waited. Waking happened in layers. Children often woke last. Their sleep was deeper. Adults rose first, quietly, so as not to disturb others unnecessarily. Elderly people might already be awake, having rested lightly through the night. The first moments of waking were calm. There was no rush to leave the bed. Warmth was precious, especially in cold seasons. People lingered briefly, gathering themselves. For the day ahead, stretching was gentle. Limbs were stiff from cold and stillness. People moved slowly, bending arms, rolling shoulders, straightening backs. These movements were practical, not deliberate exercises. The body prepared itself for work. Getting out of bed required intention. Feet met cold floors. Stone or earth drew. Heat quickly. People moved toward clothing, toward the hearth, toward warmth. Someone stirred embers. Smoke rose softly as the fire returned to life. Morning light entered gradually. Shutters opened. Doors cracked. The world outside revealed itself. Bit by bit. No sudden brightness. No glare. Just steady return. Sound followed light. Voices rose quietly. Pots moved. Tools were handled. Morning did not begin loudly. It gathered itself. Sleep did not end all at once for everyone. Some people remained resting while others began work. Children might drift in and out of sleep. Elderly people might sit quietly rather than rise. Immediately, waking was flexible. There was no expectation that everyone should be alert at the same. Moment prayer often marked the transition. For many, the day officially began with prayer, a short acknowledgement of waking, gratitude for survival through the night, a request for strength. This ritual provided structure without urgency. Sleep was not forgotten instantly. People carried the softness of rest into the morning. The boundary between sleep and waking was not sharp. It blurred gently in monastic settings. Waking was more structured. Bells signaled prayer hours. Sleep ended according to rule rather than light. Yet even here, waking was practiced and familiar. The body learned when to rise. Shock was unnecessary. Habit replaced surprise. In towns, bells also marked time. Church bells announced early hours. These sounds carried across sleeping streets. Some woke to them, others did not. Bells belonged to the background of life. They did not demand immediate action from everyone. Weather affected waking. On cold mornings, rising was slower. Bodies resisted leaving warmth. Fires were tended quickly. Movement focused on restoring heat. On warm mornings, waking was easier. Windows opened, air moved freely. Sleep loosened its hold. Season shaped the morning rhythm. In winter, mornings were darker and slower. In summer, light arrived early, pulling people from sleep before they were fully ready. Both were accepted. Sleep did not owe consistency. 1. Important difference from modern waking is expectation. Medieval people did not expect to wake refreshed. They expected to wake functional. Rest was measured by whether the day could be faced, not by how the body felt. Stiffness, lingering fatigue, and sleepiness were normal. Work began anyway. Yet despite this practicality, mornings were not harsh. There was time to sit, to warm hands, to eat something simple, to exchange a few words. The pace was steady, not rushed. Sleep faded naturally into wellness. As we pause here, at this gentle edge of night, we can feel how waking belonged to the same rhythm as sleeping. Neither was forced. Both followed the world. We stayed at the edge of waking. We felt how sleep loosened its hold slowly, guided by light, sound, and habit rather than command. Now we move gently into the early hours of the day itself. Not into work just yet, but into the quiet moments when sleep still lingers in the body. For medieval people, morning did not erase the night. Sleep stayed with them for a while. The body carried heaviness into the first movements of the day. Limbs felt slow. The mind moved carefully. No one expected instant clarity. Alertness arrived gradually, like light spreading across the ground. The first task of the morning was warmth. Cold clung to skin and clothing, especially in winter. People moved toward the hearth. Embers were stirred. A flame returned. Smoke rose softly and filled the room once again. Hands were held near the fire. Backs were turned toward warmth. The body woke from the outside inward. Clothing was adjusted rather than changed. Garments worn during sleep were straightened. Additional layers were added if needed. Clothing was practical, familiar, and slow to change. The boundary between night clothes and day clothes was thin. This continuity helped the body transition gently. Morning food was simple: bread, leftovers, thin porridge, or small portions of whatever was available. This was not a heavy meal. It was meant to wake the body, not burden it. Eating was quiet. Conversation, if it happened, was soft. Sleep still hovered nearby. Children often ate half awake. Elderly people moved slowly, conserving energy. Others prepared for work without rushing. The memory of sleep was not discussed. People did not compare how they slept. They did not analyze dreams or complain about rest unless something was truly wrong. Sleep belonged to the night, and the night had passed. Work waited, but it did not rush forward. Tools were gathered. Animals were checked. Doors were opened fully now. Light entered without restraint. The world reassembled itself piece by piece. The body adjusted. Muscles warmed through movement. Stiffness eased. Breath deepened. The lingering fog of sleep lifted. Without being forced, fatigue remained, but it was familiar. This was normal. Even after poor sleep, people worked. There was no expectation that rest should remove all tiredness. Sleep was meant to restore enough, not everything. Endurance mattered more than freshness. Naps later in the day balanced this, if work allowed. Brief rest followed the midday meal. Sitting quietly, leaning against a wall, closing eyes for a short while. These moments returned some of what night sleep had not given. Sleep extended across the whole day. Morning prayer often closed the transition from night to work. A short prayer marked the beginning of labor. It acknowledged waking, survival, and the coming effort. This moment provided emotional closure to the night. Sleep was officially left behind. In towns, morning activity spread outward. Shops opened slowly. Streets filled gradually. Bells marked time again, but they did not hurry anyone. They simply reminded people where they were within the day. In rural areas, morning belonged to animals first. Feeding, milking, checking fences. These tasks followed sleep naturally. The rhythm was well practiced. Sleep shaped the pace of all this. On mornings after poor rest, movement was slower. Tasks were done carefully. No one expected peak performance every day. Life allowed fluctuation. Illness made mornings heavier. A sick person might remain resting while others worked. This was accepted. Sleep extended into the day when needed. Rest was flexible. Sleep was not confined to the bed. One of the most important differences between medieval and modern life appears here. Sleep did not end sharply. It faded. It dissolved into waking through warmth, food, movement, and habit. The body was not shocked awake. It was invited back into the day. This gentleness reduced stress. There was little anxiety about the quality of sleep. People trusted that rest, even imperfect rest, would carry them through the day, and often it did. As the morning fully settles, sleep becomes memory. The bed waits quietly for night to return. The body moves forward, carrying the slow rhythm of rest beneath the work of the day. We move gently forward, allowing the day to soften into evening. We stayed with the morning and the slow return to work. Sleep faded without being forced, and the body carried its rhythm into the day. Now, as the sun begins to lower, we follow. Life back toward rest. Evening, in the Middle Ages, was not a sharp ending. It was a gradual narrowing of activity, guided by light, habit, and quiet expectation. The approach of night was visible. As daylight weakened, work slowed naturally. Tools were set aside. Animals were gathered in. Fields emptied. Streets thinned. The world began to fold inward. There was no single signal to stop. No bell commanding rest for everyone at once. People watched the sky. Light told them what to do. In summer, evenings were long. Work continued late. Tasks stretched gently into twilight. People lingered outside, finishing what could be finished while light remained. Sleep would come later, but that was expected. In winter, evenings arrived early. Cold encouraged stillness. Darkness pressed closer. People returned indoors sooner, not out of fatigue, but practicality. Evening routines were simple. The hearth was the center again. Fires were fed carefully. Not too much, not too little. Enough to cook, too warm to light the room. Flames flickered across walls, shrinking the visible world. Cooking happened slowly. Meals were prepared with what was available. Stews, bread, leftovers. Nothing elaborate. Evening food was meant to sustain, not excite. Eating was unhurried. Conversation, if it happened, was calm. Stories were told quietly. News was shared. Children listened or drifted towards sleep. Voices lowered naturally as the room darkened. The body responded to this change without instruction. Eyes grew heavier. Movements slowed. Thoughts softened. This transition mattered. Sleep did not arrive suddenly because the body had already begun. Preparing for it, evening prayers were common. They marked the end of the day rather than the start of sleep. Gratitude was offered, forgiveness requested, protection sought for the night ahead. These prayers did not hurry sleep. They calmed the mind. Even those who were not deeply religious followed some version of this ritual. A pause, a breath, an acknowledgement that the day was complete. Clothing shifted again. Outer garments were removed. Layers were adjusted. Shoes were taken off. The body was freed slightly from the day's constraints, but not fully undressed. This partial change signaled rest without vulnerability. Hands and faces might be washed. Water was used carefully. Washing was refreshing rather than cleansing in the modern sense. It cooled the skin, marked transition, and prepared the body for stillness. Children were guided toward sleep first. They were settled near adults or in familiar spots. Sleep came easily for them in the fading light. No struggle was expected. Night belonged to them naturally. Adults followed more slowly. Some remained awake longer, talking softly or tending small tasks. Repairs, quiet work, reflection, evening. It was not wasted time. It was a slowing time. Light inside the home mattered greatly now. Candles were expensive. Oil lamps required fuel. Firelight was uneven. Shadows moved constantly. Faces appeared and disappeared. This unstable light discouraged alertness. Reading was difficult. Fine work was impracticable. The environment encouraged rest. Outside, the world grew quiet. Animals settled. Winds softened. Sounds carried farther but happened less often. The village breathed more slowly. Darkness was expected, not resisted. Doors were closed. Bars were set. The household gathered more tightly. Shared space grew warmer. Safety felt collective. Evening was also a time of reflection. The mind reviewed the day gently. What had been done? What remained? Worries surfaced, then faded. There was no expectation to solve everything before sleep. Thoughts were allowed to drift. Medical ideas supported this calm. Heavy thinking before bed was discouraged. Anger and excitement were believed to disturb sleep. Calm conversation, prayer, and quiet activity were preferred. Even without theory, people sensed this evening emotion softened. The body began to settle into familiar positions. People chose where they would sleep. Bedding was prepared. Straw was adjusted. Blankets were shaken. Pillows placed. These actions were unhurried. Preparation itself was calming. The first sleep approached gradually. There was no pressure to fall asleep at a specific time. Sleep arrived when light was gone and the body was ready. If someone stayed awake longer, it was acceptable. If someone slept earlier, that was fine too. Flexibility ruled. Evening routines did not aim to control sleep. They aimed to welcome it. As we remain here, watching the fire burn lower, we can feel how evening gently invited rest. Sleep did not have to be chased. It approached naturally, carried by darkness, habit, and shared quiet. We followed the slow fading of daylight and the gentle routines that prepared the body for rest. Now we move closer to the final moments before sleep. Not the dramatic crossing into unconsciousness, but the quiet, ordinary steps that brought medieval people from waking into the first sleep of the night. Lying down was a deliberate act. It was not rushed. It was not distracted. The body approached. Rest with familiarity, guided by repetition rather than thought. Bedding was arranged one last time. Straw mattresses were smoothed with hands. Lumps were pressed down. Wool fillings were shifted. Feather beds were patted and allowed to settle. These small movements made the surface feel known again. Blankets were layered carefully. The order mattered. Thicker layers beneath, lighter ones above. Cloaks were folded or draped where they could be reached during the night if needed. Nothing was wasted. The bed became a contained space. People chose their position with care. Those sharing a bed settled into familiar places. Each body had its usual side, its usual curve. Children were guided between adults or placed where warmth was greatest. Movements were gentle, coordinated, practiced. The goal was not perfect comfort, it was balance. Cold drafts were blocked, bodies aligned. Blankets tucked, stillness found. The fire was checked one final time. Embers glowed faintly. Ash was pulled over them to keep warmth alive through the night without flame. This quiet task marked the end of activity. The room dimmed further. Only the softest light remained. Shadows deepened. Details disappeared. The visible world shrank to the shape of the bed and the glow of embers. This narrowing helped the mind let go. Prayers often came now. Not loud. Not formal. A few familiar words spoken quietly or thought silently. Protection was requested. Forgiveness offered. The hope of waking was acknowledged. Sleep was not assumed. It was received. For those less inclined to prayer, there was still a pause, a moment of stillness, a breath, an awareness that the day was complete. Thoughts slowed naturally. The body was tired in a way that felt honest. Muscles loosened. Breath deepened. The effort of staying awake faded. There was no attempt to empty the mind. Thoughts drifted in and out. Images of the day, plans for tomorrow, small worries. These were allowed to pass without judgment. Sleep gathered quietly around them. The first sleep arrived, softly. Eyes closed. Awareness faded. The body sank into the bed's uneven support. Warmth. Settled. Breathing found a slower rhythm. Sleep was not deep immediately. It hovered. Sounds were still noticed. A movement nearby. A distant animal. The crack of cooling wood in the hearth. These sounds did not interrupt sleep. They were folded into it. The body crossed the threshold without ceremony. Dreams, if they came, were light at first. Fragments, familiar faces, simple scenes. Dreams did not need interpretation at this stage. They were part of the body's descent into rest. Shared sleep deepened, breathing synchronized, movements quieted, the bed became still. The room held many sleepers at once, each entering rest at a slightly different pace. Sleep was communal, even in silence. For some, the first sleep was short. They woke naturally after a few hours, not abruptly, gently. Awareness returned without alarm. This waking was expected and untroubling. For others, sleep continued uninterrupted. Both were normal. No. One judged their night by its shape. The room during this time was deeply quiet, firelight barely visible, shadows unmoving, the world outside fully dark. The sense of enclosure matted walls, blankets, bodies, and darkness formed a protective boundary. The night existed beyond it, but it did not intrude. Sleep belonged inside this space. As we rest, here, watching the first sleep settle fully, we can feel how little effort was required. Sleep was not something to achieve. It was something to allow. There was trust in the process. The body knew what to do. It had done it every night of life. We moved gently into the middle of the night. We stayed with the moment of lying down and the arrival of the first sleep. Now we drift forward a few quiet hours, into a time that feels unfamiliar to modern life, but was ordinary and expected in the Middle Ages. The space between sleeps. The calm waking that came without alarm, without worry, and without urgency. For medieval people, waking in the night was normal. It did not signal a problem. It did not cause concern. It was simply another phase of rest. After several hours of sleep, the body often woke on its own. Eyes opened slowly. Awareness returned gently. The room was dark, but familiar. The fire glowed faintly. Breathing nearby confirmed presence. This waking was calm. People did not jump up. They did not reach for light immediately. They lay still at first, listening, sensing, letting the body decide what to do next. The mind during this hour was different. It was clear but unhurried. Thoughts moved slowly. Worries felt distant. The world seemed paused. This quiet clarity made the waking hour valuable. Many people used this time for prayer. Night prayers were believed to be especially meaningful. The world was quiet. Distractions were few. Words spoken in darkness felt closer to God. Prayers were short and familiar. There was no effort to be eloquent. The act itself mattered. Others used the time for reflection. They thought about the day that had passed or the one to come. They considered small concerns, family, work, weather. These thoughts were gentle, not urgent. The night softened them. Some people rose quietly. They checked the fire, added a small piece of wood if needed, ensured animals were settled, looked in on children. These tasks were done slowly, without fully waking the body. Movement was careful. Heat was preserved. Others were not disturbed. The night remained intact. In villages, neighbors sometimes visited during this hour. Doors opened softly. Voices were low. These visits were brief and calm. They belonged to the night in a way daytime visits did not. This practice surprised later historians. But it felt natural at the time. The night waking created space for quiet, social connection. Intimacy also belonged to this hour. For married couples, the space between sleeps was often considered the best time for closeness. Bodies were rested. Minds were calm. The night offered privacy even within shared spaces. This was spoken of without embarrassment. It was part of life's rhythm. Others remained in bed, simply resting. They lay quietly, half awake, half asleep. The body enjoyed warmth. Without effort. The mind drifted without pressure. This resting was not wasted time. It was part of sleep. Silence during this hour was deep. Sounds were few and clear. A distant animal whined against walls, the soft crack of embers. Each sound stood alone. People listened without anxiety. They knew their night well enough to recognize what belonged and what did not. Darkness during this time felt complete. Moonlight, if present, entered gently. Otherwise, the world beyond the walls disappeared entirely. This disappearance was not frightening. It was familiar. The night felt enclosed and protective. Importantly, there was no pressure to return to sleep quickly. People did not count minutes. They did not force rest. They trusted that sleep would come again when it was ready. This trust mattered. It removed anxiety. It allowed the body to remain relaxed, even while awake. Medical ideas of the time supported this pattern. Some physicians believed the body digested food and balanced humors during the first sleep, while the waking hour allowed circulation to settle before the second sleep. Whether true or not, these ideas reinforced acceptance. Sleep was seen as a process, not a single event. Children experienced this waking differently. Some slept through it. Others stirred briefly, then returned to sleep easily. If a child woke fully, comfort was immediate and calm. A hand, a whisper, Children learned that waking at night was safe. The elderly often spent more time awake during this hour. They prayed. They sat quietly. They waited. There was no impatience. Night did not need to be filled. As this middle hour passed, sleep returned naturally. Eyes grew heavy again. Thoughts thinned. The body cooled slightly, then warmed again beneath blankets. People returned to familiar positions. The second sleep approached without effort. We remained within the same night, letting the quiet waking fade gently into rest once more. We stayed with the space between sleeps. The calm hour of waking, prayer, reflection, small movements, and untroubled awareness. Now we follow the body as it returns, slowly and naturally, into the second sleep. A rest that felt different from the first, softer in some ways, lighter in others, and closely tied to the coming of morning. The return to sleep was unforced. After a time, wakefulness simply loosened its grip. Thoughts slowed, muscles softened. The body signaled readiness without words. People did not decide to sleep. They allowed it. Eyes closed again. The bed felt familiar now. Warmth had settled. Blankets lay where they belonged, breathing around. The room was steady. The second sleep arrived quietly. It often felt deeper at first. The body, already rested once, sank more easily. Dreams returned, sometimes more vivid, sometimes gentler. The mind drifted without effort. This sleep carried the body toward morning. While the first sleep restored strength, the second prepared the body to wake. Medical writers of the time believed this sleep balanced the body and sharpened the senses. Whether or not this was true, people experienced it as different, lighter, more responsive. Sounds were noticed more easily. A distant rooster, wind shifting, an animal stirring. These sounds wove into sleep without breaking it. The body rested. While remaining aware of the world, this awareness was not stressful. It was part of readiness. During the second sleep, people moved, more positions shifted. Knees straightened or bent. Blankets were adjusted. The body searched for comfort in small ways, preparing for the stiffness of morning. Shared sleepers adjusted. Together, one person's movement rippled gently through the bed. Others responded without waking fully. This quiet cooperation continued even in sleep. Children often slept more deeply during this time. Their bodies were warmer, their rest more complete. They rarely noticed the transition between sleeps. Adults rested more lightly. Thoughts occasionally surfaced, then faded. The mind hovered closer to waking but did not resist sleep. The second sleep did not last as long. As dawn approached, rest thinned naturally. Dreams shortened. Awareness returned in waves. No one was surprised by this. It was expected. The night had done its work. Weather influenced. This sleeps strongly. On cold nights, people woke more often. Fires faded. Cold crept back. Sleep broke and returned repeatedly. On warm nights, rest was lighter, but less interrupted. The body cooled gradually as dawn neared. Moonlight sometimes played a role, Bright moon could lighten the room and thin sleep further. People stirred more. Waking came earlier. Clouded nights kept darkness deep. Sleep lingered longer. The body adapted without complaint. Illness affected the second sleep more than the first. Pain, coughing, or discomfort often increased toward morning. Sleep broke more easily. Rest became shallow. This was accepted. People did not expect the night to heal everything at once. The second sleep was not meant to be perfect. It was meant to carry the body gently toward waking. For some, especially the elderly, the second sleep was brief. They woke early and did not return to rest. They sat quietly, prayed, waited for light. This early waking was not labeled insomnia. It was age. For others, sleep held until sunrise. Both were normal. As dawn approached, the room changed subtly. Darkness thinned, shadows softened, shapes returned. The world reassembled itself quietly. The body sensed this even with eyes closed. Breathing changed. Muscles prepared. Sleep released its hold. There was no sharp boundary. The second sleep faded rather than ended. This gentle ending mattered. It allowed waking to arrive without shock. The body crossed from rest to movement gradually, carrying calm with it. Perhaps this is the greatest difference between medieval sleep and modern. Expectation. Sleep was not required to be continuous, deep, or perfect. It was allowed to be layered, flexible, and responsive. First sleep, waking. Second sleep, waking again. We arrived gently at the edge of the story, without closing it yet. We stayed with the second sleep, and its quiet fading into morning. Now we step back, just slightly, to look at medieval sleep as a whole. Not to judge it, and not to compare it too sharply to our own, but simply to notice what kind of rest it was, and what kind of life surrounded it. Medieval sleep was not designed. It was not engineered. It was not measured. It grew slowly out of environment, habit, belief, and necessity. People slept because night arrived. They woke because light returned. Everything else adjusted around that. There was no single correct way to sleep. Some slept long. Some slept lightly. Some woke often. Some barely noticed waking at all. All of these were accepted. Sleep was not expected to solve every problem. Pain remained. Fatigue lingered. Illness persisted. Sleep helped, but it was not magical. This acceptance reduced disappointment. People did not wake expecting transformation. They woke expecting continuation. This shaped their relationship with rest. Sleep was not a performance. No one asked how well someone slept unless something was truly wrong. There was no competition, no optimization, no pressure to do it better. Sleep was private only in the smallest sense. It belonged to the household, the season, the night itself. Even discomfort did not break this relationship. Cold beds, hard surfaces, noise, insects, these were not obstacles to sleep. They were part of it. The body adapted rather than resisted. Over time, this adaptation created resilience. People learned to rest anywhere, with others, with noise, with interruption, with uncertainty. Sleep bent itself around life instead of demanding. Life bent around it. There was also humility in medieval sleep. People did not believe they controlled it fully. Sleep was seen as something given, not produced. God, nature, and the body all played a role. This belief softened anxiety. If sleep did not come easily. It was not blamed on the sleeper. It simply meant the night was doing something. Different trust replaced control. This trust extended into waking life. A poor night did not ruin a day. A good night did not promise an easy one. Life continued at a steady pace regardless. This steadiness mattered. It allowed people to live with fluctuation. The rhythms of medieval sleep also reflected closeness. Few slept alone. Most rested beside others. Breath, warmth, and presence shaped sleep as much as beds or blankets. This closeness built awareness. People noticed one another. Changes were felt. Care happened quietly. Sleep was part of community. Even strangers became temporary companions at night. Inns, monasteries, and homes turned unfamiliar bodies into shared sleepers, if only for a few hours. This taught tolerance. It taught patience. It taught the body that rest could happen without perfect conditions. In many ways, medieval sleep was slower than modern sleep. Not longer necessarily, but slower. The transition into sleep took time. The transition out of it took time. The night unfolded in layers rather than blocks. This slowness reduced shock. The body was not pulled abruptly from one state into another. It was guided. Even waking carried traces of sleep. Morning stiffness, lingering calm, gradual alertness. Sleep did not end sharply. It dissolved as we sit with this wider view. It becomes clear that medieval sleep was not idealized. It was not romantic. It was often uncomfortable, interrupted, and imperfect. And yet, it worked. It sustained lives across centuries. It adapted to cold, labor, danger, and uncertainty. It did so quietly. In the final section, we will let this story settle completely. We will close the night with a gentle reflection, not on what was lost, and not on what should be recovered, but on the calm endurance of human rest, carried across time. For now, the night is almost complete. Dawn is close, but not yet here. Sleep rests lightly on the world, finishing its long, patient work. We remain with the final moments of the night, letting them pass without hurry. In the previous section, we stepped back to see medieval sleep as a whole. Now we allow the story to settle fully, not with conclusions or lessons, but with a quiet sense of completion. Like the end of a long day, this moment does not ask for summary. It asks only for stillness. Medieval sleep did not promise comfort. It promised continuity. Night after night, people lay down knowing the bed might be cold, the surface uneven, the room shared, the sleep broken, and still they rested. Not because conditions were ideal, but because rest was necessary, and because the body knew how to adapt. This adaptation was slow and patient. Bodies learned to accept interruption without anxiety. They learned to rest lightly when needed and deeply when allowed. They learned that waking was not failure, and that sleep would return in its own time. This trust mattered. It allowed people to move through long lives shaped by uncertainty. Harvests failed, illness came and went, weather shifted. Yet sleep continued, imperfect but reliable. There was no illusion of control. Sleep was not something to master. It was something to enter. People did not ask much of it. They did not demand restoration or clarity. They allowed it to do what it could, and they met the day with what remained. This modest expectation softened life. A poor night did not become a personal flaw. A restless sleep did not require explanation. Fatigue was shared, understood, and endured. Sleep was woven into humility. There was also a quiet dignity in medieval rest. People lay down knowing others lay beside them. Children, elders, strangers, companions. Breath overlapped. Warmth was shared. The night belonged to everyone equally. In this shared darkness, differences faded. Status mattered less. Wealth mattered less. The body rested as the body without title. This equality was temporary, but real. Even the poorest sleeper and the wealthiest noble closed their eyes beneath the same sky, waiting for morning. The night did not favor one over another. It simply passed. Morning always returned, not dramatically, not triumphantly. It arrived softly, as it always had. Light thinned darkness. Sound returned. Movement followed. Sleep released its hold without resentment. The bed was left behind. The day resumed, and then, inevitably, night came again. This repetition was the quiet strength of medieval sleep. It did not need novelty. It did not need improvement. It endured through familiarity, across centuries, across regions, across generations. People lay down in much the same way. They trusted the dark. They trusted their bodies. They trusted that rest, even incomplete, was enough. Perhaps this is the calmest truth the medieval night offers. Sleep does not need to be perfect to sustain a life. It needs only to be allowed as we let this final night fade. There is no need to hold on to it. The story closes the way medieval sleep did, gently, without ceremony. The fire has burned low. Breath is slow. The world rests, not because it must, but because it always has. And somewhere, quietly, the night gives way to morning once more.